Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another Adobe XD Masterclass. My name is Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe. Hope you're all doing well on this Friday afternoon. We've made it through another week, and we're 1 week closer to Adobe Max. I'll get to that in just a moment. You are tuning in live here on Behance today. Let me know in the chat who you are and where you're tuning in from. We've got Chris and Jesse and Angelina, Wade and Angelo, Akanchka. I probably mispronounced your name. I do apologize. Hazma or Hamza and Web Donut. That's a great username. Samuel, Steven, great to see you. And Angelina saying thank you for making these videos. Oh, where'd it go? Hold on. She says, you have no idea how much you have helped me in my career. I really appreciate that. And I'm glad that not just me, but everyone on Adobe Live, whether it's the daily creative challenges or our masterclasses, I'm glad we all help you out in your quest to become whatever it is, UI designer, UX designer, who knows, right? But I'm glad we're helping. Bo from Japan, great to see you. Can you make the minion in DX? I'll show you that in a second. But great to see all of you. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and hop over to my screen. And before we dive into today's session, Adobe Max is coming up in just a few weeks, October 26th. It's the 8th right now. So we're less than 20 days away. I'm so excited. We've been working really hard on our sessions and our videos, and it's going to be a good time. Not just for XD, but for all of the applications in the Creative Cloud Suite. It's going to be a fun event, as always, completely free and virtual. So head on over to max.adobe.com. You can look at all the sessions, including the UI and UX sessions. I am running the What's New in Adobe XD session. So there's going to be 2 of those, both on October 27th, which is going to be wonderful. I'm going to introduce all the new features in XD, which is great. So definitely register for that. Now, today we are going to be working on this. So over the last few weeks, we've been building out a gaming platform, and we started with the home screen. Then we moved on to the sign-in and login experience and loading screen. Today, we're going to be tackling more of a community-driven screen with chat and hover effects and stories, because of course we're going to have stories, right? Can you say my name? Pankaj, possibly? If I mispronounce it, I apologize. Jesse says, I filled my Max schedule. I love that. So speaking of minions, there's more people talking about minions in the chat. Where did I post that? Oh, I posted on Twitter, didn't I? Let me go over here. I made a minion in XD, because why not, right? Look at that texture I added. Yeah, my daughter asked me to make a minion, and she says DX instead of XD. Don't know why, but yeah. So I made a minion. This is what I do in my free time. I need a hobby or something. I guess this is a hobby, but I made a minion. It was a lot of fun. Maybe I'll do it during a masterclass or something like that, and who knows. Anyways, the last thing, before we move on to today's session, I've also been making standalone videos for these gaming platform designs. So last week, I uploaded the first part, which is blocking everything out, very basic. And then actually earlier this morning, I uploaded part number 2, which focuses on creating the navigation bar. And that includes the collapsed view and the expanded view using hover states and components, which is really fun. So definitely go ahead if you want to watch more condensed versions of these particular masterclass designs, youtube.com/Howard Pinsky. All right, so view Adobe XD. Let's get into this. So again, like I mentioned today, we are going to be designing the community screen for this particular application. We're going to be using a lot of the same elements, a lot of the same colors and things like that. And we may make some tweaks from here, from time to time, but we'll see. How long did it take to make the minion? That's a good question. I don't really track personal projects like that. I don't know, probably a few hours in total, but it's hard to say. I usually do it, at night, just, while I'm trying to calm down, or not calm down. I'm calm usually. Just wind down. That's what I was saying. Okay. How many assets and textures did you use? That's a good question. I used the denim texture. Then there was like a skin leather texture for his actual, not too many, but there were a lot of shadows, a lot of highlights and things like that. Inner shadows saved my life. Anyways, all right. So we're going to go ahead and make an artboard to the right of this one here. And just to remind you all, this is kind of where we left off the home screen. We wired this up with component states, right? We have this download button at the bottom, and we also have this navigation bar. That's part of the video that I uploaded this morning. So what we're going to do is we are going to create a new artboard over to the right. So I grab my artboard tool, shortcut key A. I am going to grab the Web 1366 artboard so it matches. I'm going to name this community. And here we go. All right. When is 3D coming to XD? So, you know, we do have 3D transforms in XD. And if you miss that, essentially, that's a very bright square. Right at the top right-hand corner here, we have 3D transforms, and you can rotate that like that, or, right? That's likely not what you're asking. You're probably asking for true 3D. I don't see true 3D coming to XD anytime soon. You know, we have the Substance suite. We also have, you know, various applications that can kind of do some 3D stuff. But in terms of like a real 3D integration, don't see it happening anytime soon, only because, you know, it's going to just destroy performance if it's not done correctly. And to do it correctly, it would take a lot of time and a lot of resources. And there are probably a lot of things that the team wants to get to before something like 3D. Now, there might be a world where you can create something in Substance and then, you know, bring a still image of that using Creative Cloud libraries into XD. But it's highly unlikely we're going to see 3D model support like you're asking anytime soon. Maybe one day, but probably not anytime soon. All right, time tracker would be a cool feature in XD. That would be a cool feature, Laura. Let me send me a tweet, and I will talk to the plugins team to see if maybe there's a plugin that can do that. But that would be kind of cool. All right, so here we go. So to start off this particular screen, we're going to start by setting the background color, and we're also going to grab the navigation bar. So for the background, there's a few ways we can do this. We have the artboard selected, right? And we can grab the eyedropper tool, shortcut key I, and click on one of the colors in the background here. Or what we can do is if we select the first artboard here, we can copy it and then hop over here and then paste appearance. So right click, paste appearance, or you can use the shortcut. So it'll take that background color and pop it on this artboard here. And then I'm going to also grab this navigation bar and pop it in place. So we have an instance of the main component. This is not the main component, but we have an instance of that main component. So if we do want to make some changes, we would simply edit the main component and we would do exactly that. Now, one thing we might want to do is, you know, on this navigation bar, the active indicator, which is this rectangle back here, is currently on the home screen. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually hop in here and we're just going to grab this and move it down to friends. And we'll want to make sure to do that in the hover state as well. Oops, I missed it. There we go. So now we have our hover state and our active in. Perfect. Okay. Now, the first thing we're going to do over to the right of this navigation bar, we're going to set up our panel for our recent messages. And then over to the right of that, we're going to have our actual chat. If you're familiar with Discord or Slack, you have that big section in the middle where all the messages appear. And then over to the right, we might have another panel as well. So I'm going to grab the good old rectangle tool, draw one out. Something right about there. Looks pretty good. And then, you know, we might have one panel here. And then we're going to have another panel over here to the right. And this section over here is going to be where the main content is going to sit. Now, in terms of the color of these particular panels, we're going to probably keep them fairly consistent. So let's go for a nice dark color. We want to make sure it doesn't clash too much with the navigation bar. And we also don't want it to clash too much with the section in the middle, right? So we have to start thinking about the colors. Obviously, this color is not going to work, right? So at this point, you know, I might consider dropping the background color a little bit. And also want to apply that on this first artboard as well. And if you're using your document assets, you can just make that change once if you need to. Let's see. So might want to go back. Yeah, let's go a little bit darker. Maybe I'll add a little bit of blue in there. Something like that. And then content-wise, at the top, we might want to kind of kick this off with a header. So it might say recent messages, and maybe there's an icon to maybe create a new message, right? So I'm gonna grab the text tool, shortcut key T. Andrew, great to see you. Recent messages. And then in terms of the typeface, I believe we've been using Museo for most of our text layers. So Museo Sans looks pretty good. And that's way too big. So I'm gonna drop it down. Let's try about 16. That looks pretty good. And we'll change that to white to make accessibility nice and easy to read. That might still be a bit too big, but we're gonna see. We're gonna see if we can fit everything else in there, and then we're gonna make some changes. And then maybe to the right of this, there might be a way to filter this. So maybe recent messages you could filter into, I don't know, deleted messages or archived or whatever it might be. So we might want to introduce a down arrow. Now, of course, we can grab an icon, or we can activate our grid, Command and Control apostrophe, and then just use the pen tool. Boop. Whoops, I missed. Try it again. Boop, and boop, and boop. And this will be, I'll set it to white for now. Shrink that down a touch. There we go. That could do. And maybe I'll round out the corners and the joints as well, just so it's a little bit more playful. And if you're wondering why I keep opening up the preview window, by the way, I'm using Command and Control and Enter to open that up. It's because, you know, when you're zoomed in like this, and I talk about this all the time, when you're zoomed in like this, you really don't know what everything is looking like as a whole, right? So if you just pop this preview open, you can also have it on your other monitor if you want, or you can just kind of pop it over here and you can continue working, right? And it just allows you to see everything, you know, just to make sure everything's sized properly and everything looks okay. Maybe for this one, I'll introduce a little bit of color, drop this a touch. Right about there. And then finally over to the right, like I mentioned, we might want to have an icon so you can actually create a new message, right? So if I hop over to Nucleo, I do have some icons and I can, let's see, a pen maybe. Nope, note, nope, right. Okay, we're gonna have to browse through these. I forget what keyword it was. Let's see, which icon looks, and by the way, I got these, this is the Cocoa set from UI8.com. Let's see, okay, so this one over here looks pretty good. So edit, edit. There we go. We have a nice pen icon. There's a rounded one. Let's go ahead and grab this one here. I'm gonna copy it to my clipboard, paste it, change the color to white, and I'll pop it over here to the right. Now, one thing we might want to do is make sure that all the content is the same, spacing from the right and the left, right? So if I grab this layer right over here, and I hold down my Alt or Option key and hover over the side here, you have about 22 pixels from the left. Now, if we're following that 8 pixel grid, we'll want either 16, which looks a little bit squishy, but not terribly squishy, or about 24. I think that's a bit better. It gives a little bit more breathing room in there. And I might even bump this up to about 700, which will be about, semi-bold. That could work. And on this side, we'll also want to make sure that this is about, I'm going to go ahead and remove those decimals. So this will be about 24 as well. All right, that could do. I'm going to just select these elements, group them, Command and Control G, and just call this header. Okay, so our header is complete. That was the easy part, right? Now, down below here, we may want to have a bunch of messages from people who have recently messaged us. So what we're going to do is we're going to create the first one, and then we're going to use padding, we're going to use stacks, possibly components, maybe even a repeat grid, who knows, all sorts of things to make sure that we can add additional chat messages going down the artboard. So I'm going to grab the good old rectangle tool one more time, draw one out. I'm not too concerned about the actual height of this particular chat message at the moment because we're going to be using stacks, so we'll be able to very easily allow that to adjust by itself. And for this, I might want like an alternating color. So we might want to go maybe a little bit darker for this particular chat message. And we can very easily make changes to this later on. And then inside of this container, we're going to have a few things. The first thing over to the left is we're going to have our avatar of the user who is messaging us. So I'm going to draw one out here, and maybe I'll round out the corner. I'll round out the corners just a little bit. Let's try about, is 8 too much? 8 might be a bit too much. I mean, it's kind of fun though. Maybe we'll keep it at 8 and we'll see how that looks. And I may also want to introduce a way to see whether or not this user is online, offline, busy, away, that sort of thing. So right here at the bottom, I can grab my ellipse tool. Of course, you can also use a rectangle if you want to. Draw out a bubble like that. I'm going to set the border to this background color. And then in terms of the color, maybe this user is online. And by the way, if anyone's hearing banging, we have construction going on, so you might hear the occasional bang. Hopefully you can't hear it. I did crank up the noise reduction today. All right, so we have that. That looks okay. And then to the right of this avatar, we're going to want the user's name. We're going to want maybe the timestamp as to when they sent it, and then, of course, the message itself. So over here, we're going to type in, let's say, Wade is in the chat. There we go. So Wade A. Now that's obviously way too big, or I should say, Wade too big. Never mind. No, it sounded better in my head, but I'm going to shrink it down. Looks like the viewer count is just tanking right now. And then to the right of this, we're going to want the timestamp. So maybe this was sent at, let's say, 1:17 p.m. And this one is definitely secondary, right? So I'm going to drop this even more, and I'm going to also drop the weight, and I might even adjust the color a little bit so that it's not as, bright as the username. That could do. Now, one thing we have to think about is, when we do get to the next chat message, right? The person's name might be a little bit longer, so it might be, or shorter, right? So it might be, let's say, Howard P, right? Then we have to go in and kind of move this over manually, make sure it's the same spacing. So in this case, this is a perfect opportunity to use padding. So I'm going to grab both of these layers right here, and I'm going to pop them into a group, Command and Control G one more time, and I'm going to call this user. And then over within the Properties Inspector to the right, we're going to turn stacking on. And you're going to notice it defined it as a horizontal stack because there are 2 layers inside of this group, and they're laid out horizontal, left to right. And it also defined the spacing between those 2 layers. And we can, of course, dive in here and make some changes if we need to, or we can do that directly on Canvas. But what's really nice about this is when we do get to the point where we're going to change the name, we just have to start typing, right? And that text layer over to the right automatically moves beautifully, which is great. And then finally, down here at the bottom, we're going to want our chat message. Now, instead of clicking for a new text layer, we're going to click and drag to define the width. This is a chat message. My name is Wade, and I'm an awesome mod, right? There we go. And then what we'll want, we can also have something over here to the right as, possibly a way to access settings or maybe block the user, for example, right? So we can maybe grab, let's do this. Let's do a very simple, kind of like a kebab menu. Is that too big? Nope, not too bad. And I can use a repeat grid for this. So right here at the top right-hand corner, boop. Drag that in. That could do. And we don't want these menus to be like really in our face, right? So I'm going to just sample maybe one of this color over here, just so it's a little bit of a secondary element. Perfect. All right, so we have our template or our shape for the profile photo, which we're going to add in a moment. We have our username, we have our chat message, we have our menu. Now, of course, we can go ahead and manually adjust this like that, right? But what we want to happen is when the chat message is actually adjusted, we might want the padding and that the container to automatically resize. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab all the information that's part of this chat message. So the menu all the way down to the container in the background. And I'm also going to go ahead and just group some of these in this information. User photo. I'm going to place all of this into a group, again, Command and Control G, and call this chat. And then, like we did earlier, over within the Properties Inspector, we can enable stacking. We can also enable padding. Now, in this particular case, I know I'm probably not going to need to rearrange any of these elements. I'm not going to put the chat message above the name. I'm not going to do anything like that. So I'm simply going to enable padding. And when I do that, it's going to look at the content inside of this group and the background layer, which is the layer at the very back. And it's going to automatically determine that padding. So it's 13 on the top, terrible number, but let's drop it to maybe 12 possibly. And then we have 41 at the bottom. So we want to also match that. So we'll go about 12. And maybe we can actually bump this up to 16. That could do. And the great thing about this is if we dive in here and press return, hello, right? That container in the background automatically resizes it. And you're going to see when we get to the point where we have a stack inside of a stack, then even the messages below will also move, which is really cool. All right, so we have our first chat message ready to go. And if I hop over to Finder very quickly, I do have a folder of a bunch of people, and I've got some neon avatars over here, and I'm going to just drag one of them right in there. Now, of course, we can use a repeat grid for something like this, or we can use all sorts of things. We can use a plugin like UI Faces. I might show that off in just a moment. Or you can just hop over to Finder or Explore and pop an image in there. All right, so our first one's ready to go. And now we want several of these messages going down the artboard. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this single chat message, this one right here, place this into a group, and I'll call this messages. And now I want to turn a stack on inside of the Properties Inspector. Now, because there is technically only one group inside of this larger group, it defined it as a horizontal stack. And that's the default when there's only one object inside of a group. In this case, we want it to go vertically, so up and down. So I'm going to switch it over to vertical. If there were multiple layers inside going up and down, then it would define it as vertical off the bat. And now I can dive in here, grab this chat group and duplicate, and duplicate, and duplicate, right? Now what I can also do is I can dive in here because I know I want to alternate the color a little bit. Now this one, we might just want to match the background color. So I'm going to just sample that, pull the spacing back in, and now I can just continue duplicating like this, right? Move these around a little bit. Now we have a lot of Wade messages going down this particular panel, right? So if you wanted to dive in here now and make some changes, let's go ahead and hop over to Find. Actually, let's add a name in here. So we have Laura S, and maybe this was sent a little bit earlier at 1:10, and we'll grab a new image, pop that in there. And then the chat message, and this is kind of cool. So you remember earlier, when I changed the message of that first chat group, the container enlarged, which is great. However, you're going to notice when I change the message on this particular chat message, keep an eye on the messages below. So these ones down here. Currently watching Howard's latest Masterclass and learning so much. Right? And you probably saw what happened. The messages down here, because they're in a much larger stack, move down. So we have stacks inside of stacks, which is really cool. All right, over here, we're gonna have, let's see, who else do we have in here? We have Katerina, J, and then in terms of the, maybe this was sent at 101. And then we need a new image. Boop, pop that in there. And I'm just gonna type what she wrote in the chat. My life is a work in progress. I love that though. My life is a work in progress. I think all of our lives are a work in progress, right? We're always evolving, we're always learning something new. Maybe you're all learning something new right now. All right, so we have some chat messages going down. Now, I'm probably not gonna sit here and do every single chat message, because we're already about halfway through. So what I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna simply, add a few more of these. And we're just gonna have a lot of messages from Wade. Just like that. And one thing I do wanna show you is we can also combine this with a scroll group. So, when we launch the preview, we have a bunch of messages down here. And, I'm kind of looking at this now that I've, expanded this, especially compared to the navigation bar on the left. The chat message looks a little bit small. It's a bit hard to read. And this is really cool. Before I get to scroll group, if we dive into our document assets, right over here, and I'm going to select this particular text layer, the chat message, right? It's currently set to Museo Sans, 8 pixels, and 500 weight. So if I go ahead and add this to my character styles in my document assets, I want to make sure that I can adjust the size or the weight or the typeface of all of these messages. I'm going to right click on this, press edit, and then let's go ahead and bump it up to maybe 10. There we go. So you're noticing it adjusted all of the messages going down this artboard. And it also, because we're inside of a stack, if I were to make this much larger, right, all those messages enlarge as you would expect, and they all push down to make room for those changes. Now 14 is a bit too big. Let's go back to 10. That could work. And I might also want to adjust the line height a little bit, like that. That's a bit better. I would maybe even bump this up a little bit more, but you know what? We're going to run with that, and maybe I'll also just adjust the color a little bit. All right, so back to scroll groups. I always get sidetracked. One thing we might want to do is when we launch the preview, we might want to be able to scroll through all these messages from Wade, right? So what I want to do is I have the messages selected, and I'm going to, inside of my properties inspector, I'm going to press on this icon right here, which will set up a vertical scroll group. So I'll click on that, and it's going to give me these two handles, one at the top and one at the bottom. Now they snap really nicely in place, but if they didn't, you can always adjust the window for this scroll group just by dragging on these handles like that. And essentially anything inside of this little window will be visible at all times, and anything outside will be visible upon scroll. So we do have some messages down here, right? So if I now launch the preview, I can now scroll and see all of Wade's messages. Now it's a bit hard to see because it's all the same person, but let me go ahead and actually grab another photo, pop that in there, and this photo here. There we go. So now if I scroll one more time, you can now see that we can scroll. Whoop, I pasted it inside this little bubble as well. That's not what I want to do. Anyway, it doesn't matter. All right, so our chat messages over to the left are looking pretty good. I do want to make sure to group all this information. And I also want to make sure that our navigation bar is at the top. That way, if I do launch the preview and hover, it's not going to be obstructed by our messages, right? All right, so the left panel is looking pretty good. And now we're going to move on to this middle section, which is where the bulk of our actual content is going to go. And very similar to this header at the top, we may want to have something going across in this middle section. So I'm going to grab the rectangle, draw one out like we did earlier, and make sure this lines up a little bit. We can also use our guides, or we can copy and paste this particular layer from this other group. And I'll just use the same color. Now, I should probably also add these colors to my document assets, just in case I do decide to change the color across the entire document. I can always right-click, press Edit, and change this to whatever color I want. Now, obviously, that's not the color we should probably be picking, just to show you how, that's possible. I'm also going to add this character style, and I want to make sure to name this panel header. Perfect. So that will allow me to dive in here. And maybe this is a chat or a forum or a whatever it might be for gamers who design, right? So I can very easily click on that character style, pop it in there. There we go. And for this middle section, I may want to, mix it up a little bit. So maybe over to the left, there might be an icon. Make sure it's 24, and we'll do about probably 16. So for now, I'll just make this icon some sort of pink or purple. And then maybe under this, we might want some sort of a subheader. Laura says, I'm working on a brand guide in XD. That's awesome. So underneath here, maybe we'll just display maybe how many designers or how many users are online. So there might be like 391 designers currently gaming. Now, this is certainly secondary information, so we're going to drop this quite a bit. Let's try 12. 12 might be too big still. I'm going to drop the weight a little bit. Actually, that's not too bad. I think that we don't want to go too small because then it can be very difficult to read. So I think this could work. And then I'm also going to add this color over here. There we go. Perfect. All right. And then over to the right-hand side, we may want to maybe display a little bit, maybe a bit of a preview of all the users or designers or gamers that are online at the moment. So right in this area here, right? So I'm going to start with my ellipse, draw out the first user. Perfect. Masayu is asking, is it good having drop shadows in dark mode? Probably not. My philosophy on drop shadows, and I've talked about shadows a lot, is that you should try to design so you don't need a drop shadow, right? So you should have decent accessibility in the areas that matter. Now, obviously, this color here it just blends way too much with this, but this is not necessarily an area that accessibility will matter too much because users don't necessarily need to see the color difference between these two objects, right? Whereas, the text, the pure white, is great for accessibility on this darker background. So try to design so you don't need a drop shadow. But if you do want one, it should be more of like an aesthetic purpose, right? So if, let's see, do I have an example? Like up here, right? On this sign-in screen. This one right here has a drop shadow, right? We should design this so you don't need a drop shadow. This should still be visible, this container, against the background. The drop shadow was added just to pop it out from the background a little bit, just to add a little bit of depth on this design, but it's not necessarily needed, right? You probably wouldn't want drop shadows on these containers here, these text layers, right? And you probably wouldn't want drop shadows maybe on like the icons or text. You probably want to stay away from that, right? Just something to keep in mind. So try to design for no drop shadows, but if you desperately need it, keep them nice and subtle. But yeah, it's going to obviously depend on every project. Every project can be a bit different. All right, so we have our first little user here, and I'm going to set the border color to this header right here. And what I want to do is add a few of these users going across, maybe about 5 of them, right? Now, of course, we could, drag one over, drag another one over, or we can use a repeat grid. So I'm going to boop right up here. I'm going to drag out about 4 more, like that. And one of the nice things about repeat grid is you can actually overlap your layer like that. And then to fill these in, we can do what we did before. We can, hop over to Finder and grab some images and pop them in there. But let's also take a look at a plugin. So if we hop into our plugins panel at the bottom left-hand corner, we do have the UI Faces plugin installed right here. And if I dive in here and select any of these particular layers, I don't have to select all of them, I can just select one of them. I can choose a source over here to the left, let's say Unsplash, and then apply randomly, or I can select photos, and it's going to apply random photos to all of these, the similar objects inside of this repeat grid. I can also press select photos and choose them manually, or I can just press apply randomly one more time, and it's going to repeat that process over and over and over again, right? Which is kind of cool. All right. Now, before we wrap this section up, we may want one more circle over to the right that lets us know how many additional users might be online. Very similar to this over here, but more of a visual aid, right? So let me actually grab this layer. I'm going to paste it outside of the repeat grid. And this one, we're going to do a very simple fill like that. And then a text layer, maybe just something like plus 42. Is that too large? I think it's a bit too heavy. There we go. That could do. And I'm just going to make sure to group all this information and call this users. I'm not completely digging that 42 typeface. It looks a little bit off. I'm not sure why. Maybe the text is a little bit too bright. Something looks a bit off. It'll do. That will do. Is the dark theme important these days? It can be. Obviously, XD doesn't have dark mode. And I know someone's going to ask about it. Is it important? There's a big debate. Some people say it's great for your eyes. Other people say it's actually not good for your eyes. There's been a lot of studies on dark mode and things like that. If you use dark mode too much, on my phone, for example, I have it set to automatic so that during the day it's light and during the night it's dark. There are debates. A lot of it is personal preference. And that's one of the reasons we haven't added dark mode just yet, is because it's more of a personal preference type of thing, and because it's not necessarily needed, and of course there are a lot of technical challenges behind it. It's not as easy as it might seem. One day we'll get there. Drew says, here it comes. All right. Anyways, moving on from dark mode. Down here, we're going to start adding our actual messages, right? So very similar to actually this section over here. And you know what? To make our life a little bit easier, I'm going to dive in here, select some of this information, copy it, and paste it. I'm all about making my life a little bit easier, right? There we go. Now, obviously, the messages here will be the focus of attention. So what we're going to do is we're going to drag out this text layer, view, all the way to the right. Now, kind of looking at this section looks very large, right? So we may possibly want to expand this panel on the right, just so we don't have too much room. Tim says, somebody mentioned dark mode? And I'm also thinking, because this section in the middle is going to be the focus, these elements are probably naturally going to be a little bit larger. Possibly. Not always the case, but possibly. So let's go ahead and make this a bit bigger. And I'll make the text a little bit bigger as well. This I can probably keep as is. And this I'm going to make bigger. Is that too small still? And you're noticing, right? Possibly. When you start really kind of mixing your text up, it just kind of throws off the balance, right? As I'm looking at this, the text over here is 14. The text over here, I think, is 10, something like that. And it just kind of, it almost makes this side feel, even though we want the focus to be in this middle section, it just feels a bit off. So I would either make this text a little bit larger or this text a little bit smaller. We'll try that. We'll see what that looks like. All right. And group that. And then, very similar to what we did earlier, we can use a stack, right? So I'm going to dive in here, pop this into a group again, messages, turn a stack on, make sure it's vertical, and then duplicate. And I can make sure that we have, let's say, 24 pixels in between each one. We can also put a container in the background if we wanted to add a little bit of padding there. But I think this could look pretty good. And then we can just add a few more. Now, we can definitely mix things up a little bit. So some of these messages will have, a different line, right? And then some of them might have maybe, if you're familiar with Slack, Discord doesn't have it just yet, but Slack has, threaded replies. I think Discord just recently added it, but not many people are using it. But maybe like right down here, we might want to display the users that have replied to this particular message. Now, we do have this element up here we can probably just steal and use, right? So I'm going to grab this repeat grid. Let's hop into this message over here. I'm going to paste it. And you're noticing as I'm moving that around, the chat messages below shift really nicely. Now those are way too big, so I'm going to just dive into the repeat grid and make them a bit smaller. I want to change the border color. Let's overlap them a little bit. There we go. And then right beside here, we might want to write something like 9 replies. Oh, Discord's threads disappear after 24 hours. That's bizarre. We've been asking for threads in Discord for a long time because we have, 50,000 members in our XD Discord, and then I think like 70,000 in Photoshop or something like that. There are a lot of people talking and asking questions. And threads just make lives so much easier just to keep all the answers and discussions inside of one, thread, right? And having those disappear after 24 hours is really strange. All right. And then we can also add, some messages with maybe images, right? So if I dive in here, I can grab my rectangle and draw one out. Again, the stack does its thing really nicely. Maybe I'll round out the corners just a little bit here. Let's go about 8 pixels. Is that too much? That could do. And then since this is for a gaming experience, I'm going to actually hop over to this Creative Cloud library. I'm going to grab an image here. Let's say, this one here. Pop that in there. And I might even want to give a little bit of a border for this particular element. Because depending on the image that we're dragging in, it may clash a little bit too much with the background. So in that case, adding a little bit of a border, very subtle border on the inside, can just ensure that it doesn't blend too much. Now, going back to the talk about drop shadows, even though you certainly don't need a drop shadow in this case, if you did want one, you can add a very subtle drop shadow, something like that. Make sure to blur it, just so there's a very subtle drop shadow there. In a case like this, I would probably reserve that drop shadow for maybe the hover state if you're going to have one. But you probably don't need one, right? So something like that looks pretty good. And then I'm going to duplicate a few more of the, oops. I think there was another one down here, wasn't there? Or did I miss it? Oh, here it is. So similar to our messages on the left, we can also enable a scroll group in this section here. So I do have the overall group selected. I'm going to turn another vertical scroll group on. Now this one, because it didn't extend all the way to the top, I do have to pull out the handles a little bit. That one down there looks pretty good. And now I can scroll down here, and I can also scroll over here. Now, one thing you're noticing here is when I get to the bottom of this scroll group, it stops right on the edge, which is probably not ideal. We want a little bit of padding down there. So all we have to do here is inside of the scroll group, I'm going to select the overall messages group. It's the one with the padding on it. Sorry, with stacking on it. But right now it has 0 padding on it. So if I switch it over to control the padding on all sides manually, I can go to this third text field, which is the bottom. So essentially it's top left, top right, bottom, and then bottom left, and then bottom right, right? Something like that. And then I can just bump this, left, top, right. I'm thinking of corner radius. Top, right, bottom, left. There we go. So I can add maybe, let's say, I don't know, 24 pixels at the bottom. So now when I scroll, we have a little bit of padding down, which is really nice. And of course, when we add maybe an element for text input, then this padding may be a little bit larger or smaller, who knows, right? All right. There's a lot of Wade on this. Wade is probably annoyed right now. Sorry, Wade. All right. Let's go ahead and move on. I was going to add a few more elements in this section here, but let's go ahead and move on to this section just so we can get as much in as possible. Now, we do have this header up here. I'm actually going to copy that, paste it over here. Now, this panel is a little bit larger, right? So we want to make sure to space this out a little bit. Now, this is going to be a little bit different. So this is obviously not going to be recent messages. And I want to make sure to maybe pop this into a stack. Activity. Actually, you know what? We probably don't even need this down arrow because this will always be activity. But over here, we might want maybe a filter icon, for example. So if I go and let's say maybe type out settings, I can copy that. Oops, wrong document. There we go. So now we have our activity. And then down below here, you know, on our messages, we alternated the color. We'll probably want to do the same thing. So the actual header will be that color there. And then down below, we're going to grab this darker color and pop that in. Now, one other thing you can potentially do if things are clashing a little bit too much is add, you know, very subtle borders, possibly something like this going down the artboard. Something like that, just to add a little bit of a break in there. But ideally, we would tweak these colors so that they're a little bit more visible. Something like this, right? And I'll probably also tweak this color a touch as well. I can spend hours just tweaking colors, but I'm not going to bore you all. All right, so in this section here, we may want to kick off with story, right? Everyone has stories these days. So we're going to do something like stories. We'll just add a little bit of a header. Something like that. Perfect. And then we're going to start creating our actual users. So this is going to be made up of a few parts. One, an ellipse for the user, right? And as an example, I'm just going to grab an image here. Let's grab this one, pop that in there. And then usually on a stories experience, the unviewed stories have a bit of a border around it. And often they're, you know, a gradiented border. So what we're going to do is on this particular image here, I'm going to add a white border. And then I'm going to duplicate this shape, make it a bit bigger, and move it behind. And what this is going to allow me to do is add a gradient. So maybe at the top, we might want maybe a pinkish purple, and then the bottom, maybe a darker color, something like that. And now we have a little bit of an indicator for our story. So this one in particular is not red, and then eventually we'll get to those that are red, right? And this, let me see, Vanessa. Make this about 12 possibly. Brighten this up a little bit. Make sure this is centered, and it might be a little bit too large because some names will be a little bit longer. So I'm going to drop the size a little bit more. that could do, right? All right, so I want to make sure to group these elements. Story. And like many of the other elements that we've created today, we can use a stack, we can use a repeat grid, we can just manually copy and paste. But I do want to point something out. So in this case, we're going to use a repeat grid. Boop. Command and Control R, and boop. I haven't done the boop today yet. There we go. So I'm going to drag a few out, right? Just like that. Let's drag one more over so we have a little bit of overlap there, and we're going to get to a scroll group in just a moment. And then in terms of the photos, we'll just select a few of these, drag them all directly in. Now, what I mentioned earlier is that, some of the stories are unviewed or unread or whatever you want to call it, so they have a gradiented background. But some of them, maybe this story onwards, maybe you've already looked at them, right? So we want to kind of darken that or have a grayed out border or gradient or whatever it might be, right? But because we're in a repeat grids are made so that if you make styling changes on one of the cells, it pushes those changes to the others. So if I were to dive in here and change this to gray, what you're going to notice is it's doing what a repeat grid should do. It's pushing those changes to all the other cells, which we don't want in this case. So what we can do is we can actually utilize a component. So on any of these cells, I'm going to select that border in the background, that one right there, which I'll probably name border. And then we're going to turn this into a component. Now, when we do that inside of a repeat grid, it's going to create that as an instance, which is exactly what we want. So we can immediately dive in here, and we probably don't even need a gradient in this point. We can just do something like that, right? And I can copy this, paste it, and paste it. And there we go. And I need some more names. Laura and Hayden. And then we've got... I'm not going to do Wade again. Wade is on too many screens already. Steven. And then finally... Oh no, there's two more. RNVP. And... who else do we have? I'll just put Michelle. There we go. So our stories experience is looking pretty good. And like many of the other panels, we might want scroll group. In this case, it's going to be a horizontal scroll group. Now this one here, we want to make sure that this extends all the way to the right. And then similar to the messages down at the bottom, down here, we may also want to add in a bit of padding. Now we can either place that into a group and add padding on the right, or because we're in a repeat grid, we can just add a little bit of space right there before the next cell gets introduced, right? And now we have a bit of padding there. Perfect. All right. This might be achievements. We have like 2 minutes left. I'm not sure how much I can get done, but let's see what we can do. I'm just going to zip through this and see if we can at least get this section done. Go, and then pop a user in there. Perfect. And then over to the right, there may actually be an icon. I don't have one right now, I don't think, but there might be an icon that shows the actual badge, right? And then this is another area we can use a repeat grid. Drag out a few more. Grab some images, and boop. Beautiful. All right. And then finally, down at the bottom, we may want one more section for latest highlights. I'm running out of time. And this will basically, be very similar. But over to the right, or I guess below it, there might be an image that shows maybe a screenshot that someone has taken. Something like this, right? There we go. And very quickly before I wrap up, bam. All right. It's a little bit messy, and there's a lot of weight in here. But there we go. In about an hour, we created a pretty decent looking community screen. Certainly not perfect because we did kind of rush some of it. And, you know, again, thank you, Wade, for allowing me to use not your face, but your name at least. But that's going to wrap it up for today. 2 more masterclasses until Adobe Max. Hope you're all excited. I'm very excited. Thank you to everyone who has tuned in. I don't believe, let me double check. I don't believe, oh, is Kyle? Maybe. Okay, Kyle T. Webster might be coming up after me. I know he had a potential scheduling conflict, but it looks like it's on the books. So stick around for that, and I will see you all next week.